On what is currency short, because we're going to be joined by Ron Paul in just about a minute. I don't think liberals understand what currency is. I think they think that there are trees in Washington that blossom every April 15th, and then the government sends out a unionized workforce of pickers to just harvest the currency, and then they can decide how to spend it. If you look back at what currency is an efficient way to streamline value so things of value can be exchanged. If we were to go back pure to a barter society, we could do that, but it'd be very hard. I mean, you got a guy who's got a cattle ranch, another guy's got a corn farm. They're going to be standing there at the marketplace. I don't know. I'll give you a bushel of corn for one of those steaks. All right. Well, I'll take one ear of corn and go over there and buy a beer from the brewer. Then eventually you need something that everybody agrees upon will be used as a means of exchange. Then you need it fixed to something. You need it to be fixed to something so you know exactly what it is you have in your hand and what its value is. It used to be gold, sometimes gold and silver. You want to hear some funny audio? This is Ron Paul questioning Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke.
Do you think gold is money?
No.
It's not money. Even if it has been money for 6,000 years, somebody reversed that and eliminated that economic law.
Well, it's an asset. I mean, it's the same. Would you say Treasury bills are money? I don't think they're money either, but they're a financial asset.
Why do central banks hold it?
Well, it's a form of reserves.
Why don't they hold diamonds?
Well, it's tradition.
Joining us on the program right now is Ron Paul. Hello, sir.
Hello.
I don't want to laugh at that, but it's sort of like the old saying, if I don't laugh, I might cry. Our Federal Reserve Chairman honestly doesn't believe that gold is money?
It looks like that is the case. And I bet any money he can't define what a dollar is either, because there's nothing in the code that defines a dollar. So it's no wonder you have a messed up economy when you can't even define what is supposed to measure value. And this has been something that's been important to me for a long time. But eventually we have to get to that point where you decide what money is all about. If money is arbitrary and has no definition, and a group of individuals secretly can create it out of thin air, like picking blossoms off a tree.
You like that one, huh?
Yeah, it will always lead to trouble. It leads to the malinvestment, debt pyramiding of debt. It leads to the financial bubbles. It ends up in all the corrections, the recessions and depressions. It's all related to that by not being willing to define what the dollar is, and yet the Constitution, the founders knew exactly what a dollar was.
I'm convinced that there are people in this country that think that there's a botany book someplace that describes the North American Potomac currency tree. Because it seems like I've heard commentators make references to a consumer-driven economy where they'll say, well, there's the people that make stuff, and then there's the people who buy stuff. But if the people who buy stuff don't have any money, they can't buy stuff from the people who make stuff, and there's your recession. And I try to remind people that think that way. If you're giving money to people to buy stuff, where does it come from? I love to quote Adrian Rogers in this program. The government can't give something to someone that it first doesn't take from someone else. If you tax a company to give currency to people to buy stuff from that currency, they just inflate their prices to offset the taxes that you took from them to give that money away.
And I think what you just said is so clear, and I say it in a very similar way to, even grade school kids and high school kids, certainly college kids, and they all seem to understand it. They can't understand why governments don't understand it or why they refuse to listen to it. But I think it's both. They don't want to understand it, but it's also very convenient for the people in government to ignore it because they can vote for things and not worry about the deficit until it gets pretty late in the game, like it is now. So that's really why they don't want to pay attention, because it sort of finances their own largesse, and it takes care of the politician who wants to always please their constituents, and we get overly involved. But history is so clear on this. Eventually, it ends badly. And we're witnessing this now. We're in a crisis now, but they're not even talking about the crisis. They're not talking about what we're talking about now. They're talking about the artificial debt limit on August 2nd. You know, they're not talking about what you really need to do on the amount of spending that we need to cut.
Do you think this, because to me, this is a really good time with technology, whether it be Sirius XM, which you're talking over right now, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. I don't think a lot of the Washington speak is flying over people's heads anymore the way it used to. When you hear a politician say, well, we're going to make cuts to proposed spending. Well, gee, I mean, you could sound like a saint on the cuts to proposed spending. Just propose 90% more than you actually want to spend, cut it back to what you want to spend, and say, look, I saved everybody 90%.
Yeah, and that's essentially what they've been doing. But, you know, one way that you might deal with this, and if we would have done it 10 years ago, everything would have been perfect. Instead of talking about these proposed cuts of the increases, why not just say, yes, I'd like to cut a lot, really have cut, but why don't we just freeze everything? We'll give everybody, you know, this year what they got last year. But they don't. But I think that would be appealing to a lot of people in the country. It would be less threatening, because when they hear it, they say, oh, we're going to give them $10 billion more for their budget, but we're going to cut back $5 billion. Oh, I don't want to have any cuts. Well, then let's just freeze everybody. But that doesn't happen. If I don't know whether we could even do it now, but we could have done it 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, and the budget would have been balanced. But
I got one for you. We know, regardless of, and we were playing some audio just about 2 weeks ago of Lyndon Baines Johnson giving a little talk to a newly elected Ted Kennedy, and he's complaining that conservative Democrats like Senator Dick Russell of Georgia, if once they got wind of what Medicare was going to cost 5 years out, that they were going to flip out and start sounding the alarm. And his sort of gist of the conversation was, we can't let these people see the projected cost. We can only let them see what it's going to cost this year, because once it hits $100 million, you're going to have people, you know, running for the hills on this. I'm noticing that the president is saying things like, and forget what we think about some of these programs, people aren't going to give them up. We know that's some kind of the third rail. But why is it the president is getting away with saying, or even some Republicans who are kind of teetering on the political message here, we're saying, well, we might not be able to pay out Social Security, we might not be able to pay out Medicare or troops or veterans benefits, but I never hear anyone say, hey, we might have to cancel a payment to the UN. They might just have to figure out how to get that money someplace else, like from China. We don't have billions of dollars to give to the IMF anymore. We're going to have to cancel. We're going to have to be late on a payment to a third world dictator with foreign aid. How is it that the president can get away with that kind of talk and nobody says to him, sir, hey, why don't you just not give money to the IMF this week?
That's because they don't have you in the Main Street media there at that press conference in Washington asking these questions. How about why do we have to pay interest to the Federal Reserve? I mean, that's not a real debt. I mean, they bought Treasury bills with money they manufactured. So that's in the budget. That's part of the debt, and it's part of the expenditures. And you could just delete that. You don't need to pay them, and we'd still have plenty to pay, you know, the bills as we go along. But somebody would have to finally, you know, come up short. And Congress should designate the priorities. But if they don't, I think the president should have the authority to, you know, just pay the bills as the money comes in. But they don't want any of that. They want that debt limit increase. If this was such a major crisis, I think the bond markets would be reeling. But actually the bond prices...
Gold is skyrocketing.
Yeah, the bond prices are very high. The interest rates are very low. So they're not panicking like there's going to be, you know, a crisis on August 2nd. It's just not going to happen. The ongoing crisis, though, which is always being pushed further ahead, is the default. The default is real, but the default isn't going to be by us not sending checks. The default is coming because the printing presses are going to continue to run, And that's why they want the debt limit increases, just getting the printing presses sanctioned, and the default falls on the middle-class Americans and the poor because that's when the prices go up. That's the real default they ought to worry about.
But here's the thing with it, and Ron Paul's joining us. Looking at what the IRS and the Treasury take in per month, looking at the mandatory expenditures, they have the money to pay these bills.
Right.
It seems to me that the politicians who have built their political careers on rent-seeking, constituent groups, promises that can't be kept, are the only ones that seem really, really nervous about what's going to happen when they can't spend money that they were never given the power to spend in the first place.
Right.
Article 1, Section 1 is clear. Article 1, Section 8 is clear. The 14th Amendment, Section 5 is clear. The president doesn't have this power, and Congress only has limited power.
Yeah, and yet the people keep trying to drum up the fear. I mean, they believe everybody will capitulate. You know, whether it was the fear of the economic collapse in '08, everybody rushed to bail out everybody. But they do it in foreign policy as well. If they need a war, they'll say, well, if you don't, we're going to be attacked. They're going to hit us with a nuke. Oh, well, we better go start another war. You know, it's on and on. It never stops. Oh, you know, they're going to come after us, so we need to give up all our freedoms, and we need to have the TSA and probing us and X-raying us forever for no real purpose at all.
Do you think? And I'm hoping to get I'm going to ask you a point blank question here. You think John Boehner's going to be the one to cave here?
Well, I don't know. I guess somebody's going to allow the debt limit to go up. But whether it's him or who, I think he's the one that will try to get it to happen. I mean, some of the stuff that we've already voted on, that cap and tax thing, that was raising the debt limit. So even though a lot of conservatives supported that, so I think there'll be a consensus. I don't think it'll be an individual like John Boehner was responsible for doing it. I think somebody's going to get together, and the debt limit will be increased. And what my guess is they'll probably do it temporarily, you know, a shorter term, you know, a couple months. And so August 2nd is a big date because people are getting ready to go on a lot of trips in August. That's junket month. And I think that's why that date is set.
Well, it just seems to me that the federal government is never going to learn its lesson. So long as the goalposts can be moved, they are never, ever, ever going to change their behavior. And this is the thing. They keep saying that Reagan had it raised and Clinton had it raised and H.W. had it raised. Everybody's raised it. But at what point, and we're running out of time here, so I don't know if you have time to answer this in full, at what point does just the interest alone consume nearly 100% of GDP?
Well, we don't know that because we don't know what interest rates will do. They'll try to keep interest rates very low, but eventually the market will dictate higher interest rates. But I think what will limit it will be the value of the dollar in the marketplace when prices go up. I think that's when the whole thing comes down on our head, just as it came down on the Soviets' head. They couldn't maintain their empire when they got preoccupied in Afghanistan. And I think the same thing will happen to us. I think that's going to happen within the next couple of years.
That's frightening. All right, Ron Paul, we love having you on the program, and whenever you got something to say, you know, you got a platform here. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you. Good to be with you.